Hi, good evening. I've been away for a couple of evenings, largely because I've been celebrating 25 years of priesthood, and it's left me rather exhausted, I think I can say. It's quite hard walking upstairs. I'm aching in every part of my body. But hey, I'll survive. And it was all in a good cause. Now, you've heard of the four last things. You will have heard of the four last things. I very much doubt you'll have ever heard a sermon on the four last things. And I'm absolutely certain I've never given a sermon on the four last things, even though once upon a time it is said that priests often talked about the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, hell. And indeed, there were wonderful sermons on death. There was supposed to be a famous sermon preached in which they say, the tree that contains the wood of your coffin is growing in the forest. Indeed, that tree has already been cut down. So, to try and terrify you that death is coming soon. Well, death is coming for us all. We've gone too far the other way, I think, nowadays, in that we don't want to talk about death. It's really good that we should talk about death, but we should talk about death realistically, not over dramatically, and certainly we should not go down the path of the denial of death, thinking it's not going to happen to us. Death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Judgment, one we don't often hear about. That is to say, when we die, we'll appear before God for our particular judgment. He will go through with us all the things that we did in our lives and the effects those things had, and he will evaluate us. And then heaven or hell. But of course, there's a third one, purgatory. Purgatory being the most likely option for the vast majority of us. Hell, let us hope we avoid it. Hell is for those who reject God, who have rejected God, who die in mortal sin. And heaven is for those who are perfect already and go straight to God, having lived perfect lives. Now, those four things are rather important, I think, and quite often you would expect them to be in the Holy Scriptures and therefore in the readings that you could use for funerals. In fact, the Bible is, well, it's quite sparse, the amount of material to do with death, judgment, heaven, and hell. We've got quite a lot in the Old Testament about people dying happily, surrounded by their family, people like Abraham. We've got a tiny bit in the Old Testament about purgatory, namely in the book of Maccabees, when Judas Maccabeus orders a memorial sacrifice to be made for those who have died, so that they may be released from their sin. We've also got quite a lot about judgment. We've got the sheep and the goats. That is a possible gospel reading for a funeral. And we've also got the death of Jesus, as told to us in the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels and St. John. You can have the death of Jesus, darkness covered the earth between the 6th hour and the 9th hour and so on, and the 6th hour and the 9th hour, which is, I think, I personally have never known anybody to choose that gospel, the gospel of the death of Christ. The liturgy does talk about us dying in the way that Jesus has died, and Jesus has died in the way that we die, that death is something we share with the Son of God. But the idea of reading out Jesus' death on the cross, which we do, of course, on Good Friday and Palm Sunday, doing that at a funeral, I just don't think anybody really wants to do that. I'm not quite sure why. Largely because I think a funeral is supposed to be about comfort, and that gospel is slightly dramatic and slightly depressing. And also, that gospel of death of Jesus is slightly incomplete because it's death and resurrection. Jesus dies only to rise again. Now, it's very, very strange, I feel, very strange that in the readings that we're given for the Gospels in a Requiem Mass, we don't have the resurrection of Jesus. Now, the actual readings you have in the lectionary, the third volume of the lectionary, are there for you to choose, and you can always choose something that's not there. You can choose any reading from the Gospel or any reading from the Old Testament if that's what you want to do. So you could have the reading of the resurrection of the Lord. I think that would be most appropriate. That, from my point of view, is most appropriate. As it turns out, given the readings that we have, people almost always tend to go for the very first one, which is Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 10, the Beatitudes, which we all know off by heart. Virtually every funeral I do has the Beatitudes. Now, the reason that reading is there, the reason why it was chosen, is because it contains the wonderful line, "Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted." That is why that reading is there. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, they shall inherit the kingdom of heaven." because, you know, the poor in spirit are destined for heaven, and we pray that the person who has died is destined for heaven. So that's also important. So it's appropriate for a funeral. It's a good thing to have for a funeral. But I don't think it's anywhere as dramatic or as lovely as the gospel of the resurrection, which is what I would choose to have for my funeral. In fact, I think I better sit down and work out what readings I'm having for my funeral, because that's the one I want. So the resurrection is at the heart, it seems to me, of the whole Christian appreciation of death. We die, yes, to rise again. Jesus died to rise again. We die happily, content, with serenity, knowing that we will rise again. Just like those martyrs of old, they died with complete serenity. Consider Saints Perpetua and Felicity, knowing they would get their lives back because Jesus Christ is the resurrection. And of course, there is one gospel you can have, that's the resurrection of Lazarus. I know that my brother will rise again on the last day, is what Martha says to Jesus. But if you had been here, my brother would not have died, she also says. Slightly strange one. Okay, talk more about this next tomorrow, I hope. All the very best. Bye.